Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little for PokerNews.com, and today I have a hand that I played in a $3,500 buy-in World Poker Tour event. I have 30,000 chips at 150,300, which is roughly a starting stack. Everyone folds to me in the hijack seat, and I raise to my standard 800. You generally want to raise to about 2.5 to 3 big blinds in most poker tournaments when you are deep stacked. And then a Russian, quote-unquote tag, maybe kid decides to call. Flop comes ace, ace, 5, and he checks. Whenever you flop the nuts like this, you typically do want to bet, as you would bet with your entire range. This is a scenario where if you have a hand like 8-7, you want to bet and steal the pot. That's always a very good result. So whenever that is the case, you usually want to be able to continuation bet just to balance your range. I assume my opponent is a good player, because if you come to play a World Poker Tour event, you are probably... assuming you are actually a Russian player. He seemed like a good, competent online kid. Players like that are usually very good. So against good players, you want to be somewhat balanced. So that sort of implies that you need to be betting both your good hands and your weaker hands. So he checks. I bet 800, and he calls. That's a good thing for me. At this point, his range is going to be quite wide. Probably a lot of pairs, a lot of flush draws, and some aces. Turns the jack of diamonds, he checks again, and at this point I have to decide if I can extract additional value on the turn from worse pairs and also marginal draws, like perhaps king of diamonds, queen of spades, or something like that. And I think I can, and if I do get check raised, especially if the check raise is relatively small, I can certainly continue going for value. So this is a spot where I like betting again. If I was unsure how to play if my opponent did elect to check raise me on the turn, I think checking behind would become the best play, looking to call on pretty much any river, even a diamond river, assuming I don't make a full house. So I do bet half pot on the turn. I think he can realistically call this with a lot of worse hands. He's certainly never folding an ace. He's never folding a hand like pocket queens, which I don't think he has very often. He's probably not going to fold a hand like king jack or any jack. So there's a lot of hands I can get value from. He may not even fold a hand like pocket threes with the 3 of diamonds. So I like this bet size. He does call. River is a 9, pretty much a complete blank. He checks again. When he checks the third time, it's fairly likely he doesn't have a flush. So if he doesn't have a flush, will he pay off a river bet with any of his range? If he has a hand like king jack, I think he probably will pay versus a small river bet. If he has an ace, he's going to pay versus any river bet for the most part. No one really folds 3 aces. So I think I do want to bet again. Of course, he's going to call with a flush every time, but I'm not so concerned with the flush, just because there should not be very many flushes in our opponent's range to begin with, especially compared to the number of random ace-x he could have. So I'm going to bet, and I think we want to bet somewhat medium. I like to go very small, 2,600, and I think this is actually a little bit too small. And the reason I think this is too small is because if he has an ace, we could have extracted more. If he has a jack, we could have extracted more. And if he has an underpair, like pocket sixes, is he really going to call 2,600 on the river? Probably not. So I think this is one of the worst bet sizes in this scenario. I likely recognize my opponent's river calling range was going to be somewhat bluff catchery, meaning it's a lot of bluff catchers, but at the same time, I think they are value heavy enough to where we can justify bigger bets. And then, to my surprise, he check raises to 7,000. Man, oh man. Now we're in a pickle. When he check raises the river, do we really think he's ever going to be bluffing? Like just stone bluffing with nothing? Well, I don't think he's ever going to have nothing, but if he is bluffing, it's probably going to be with a king high hand with the king of diamonds. That's a very good hand to bluff with. Maybe a queen high hand with a queen of diamonds. Those are reasonable. He could also have a hand like ace 3 and decide to turn it into a bluff. Notice on the river I actually bet 2,600 into the 7,000 pot. He maybe, perhaps, misconstrue my small bet as a thin value bet with a hand like pocket 10s or pocket queens, and is now check raising ace-x for value. So by betting small here, I've really put myself in a bad spot, because I do not know if my opponent would check raise bluff this river because of my bet size. Like right here, I perhaps induced something, but I don't really know if I've induced anything. Maybe my opponent just has the nuts. At this point, my hand is a complete bluff catcher. Do I think my opponent's bluffing very often in this spot? In general, probably not. But at the same time, he is a good Russian kid. And if he's a good Russian kid, they probably have some check raise river bluffs in them. So I would not fault myself for calling in this scenario. But this time I like to fold. And I don't like folding at all. But I did it this time. I think in general, if my opponent has been very straightforward and very in line, I'm going to be inclined to fold this river. And in reality, when people check raise you on the river, the vast majority of the time it is incredibly face up. So if that's the case, my fold's just fine and standard. But if my opponent ever is getting out of line, trying to exploit me, this could have been a pretty big error because obviously by the time we get to the river, we're getting pretty good pot odds. So tough spot. I really don't know what I should have done in this scenario, but I sure wish I would have played it differently. So that's going to be it for this video. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Jonathan Little, and feel free to leave your comments below. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check back next week for another video.